Hey everyone, Dr. Chuck Betters here, and I'm coming to you from my dad's YouTube channel, Ask Dr. Betters. And he's invited me to be part of helping him to answer the many questions that have been submitted. And today we have a great question from someone I imagine to be a young father or a soon-to-be father or someone who's been a dad for a couple years and they can see how difficult it is. And he asks this: I wasn't raised in a Christian home, so I am really scared that I won't be an effective father. What are some of the secrets to raising children in a way that they love Jesus when they get older? So I have a suggestion, not just a suggestion, but something that I've learned from the scriptures and something from experience and that I've seen work in our lives and our parenting that I'm really excited to share with you. I'll share it a little bit later on. It's as close to a silver bullet answer as I can get. It just really worked well for us, and I pray that it will for you as well. But first, I want to impress on you the importance of this question. Because everyone who says to young parents, you know what, it goes really fast, make sure you enjoy every moment, it goes fast, that is so true. I mean, it may seem kind of simple to say that, but it's right from the outset, I want to impress on you, young parents, how quickly it goes. It goes so fast. I've told people before, young parents, I've said, you know what, as I look back, the years from 0 to 10 years old, if you could say they went slow, I don't believe they did, but if you could say they went slower, they did. So 0 to 10 years old, they seem to go a little slower. But from 10 years old to 18 years old, when they're an adult or when they're becoming an adult, that goes so fast. And I know I've talked to a lot of other parents who agree with that. So it just goes fast. And you have such a small window of opportunity to make a difference in their lives. You know, I hate to sound bleak about it, but it's the truth. I mean, we have such limited time with our children that you have to make that impact. You know, you're going to make all kinds of mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. I made mistakes. My parents made mistakes. We all make big mistakes. But overall, though, it'll be the most difficult job you've ever done. You know, the President of the United States, he or she, their most difficult job is not being president. It's being a parent if they have kids. Being a pastor was a very difficult job, difficult calling. It wasn't the most difficult job I did, though, at the time. The most difficult job was being a parent to our 4 children. The last thing you want to do is raise a kid who no one wants to be around. Let me repeat that. The last thing you want to do is raise a kid who no one wants to be around when they're a kid and no one wants to be around when they are an adult. Which is more difficult? Raising a child the right way or dealing with the fallout when they're an adult and they're messed up because of the way that you raised them, quite frankly. You know, I know that sounds harsh, but so many people, they have the ability, they've been given the gift of these children, they've been entrusted children by the Lord, and so God doesn't give us something that we're not also equipped to handle. If He's given you a child, there are ways, even if you're not equipped at the outset, for you to get equipped to be able to raise that child to love the Lord. It's very hard. I'm not going to lie, it's very hard. So we are involved in a ministry to girls who are rescued from human trafficking. It's called Path to Freedom, and we are house parents for this ministry. So we actually live with these traumatized girls, and we are parent figures to them for the brief time or the longer time that we might have them. And so during our training, we were watching all kinds of videos that are provided by the state, and one of the videos, in order for us to be licensed to be able to do this, one of the videos was just so helpful. And it was an older child psychologist. And you could just tell by the way he was speaking to the crowd and some of the things he shared, and I'm about to share in a minute, that he really didn't care about all the politically correct stuff. You know, he didn't care. Maybe he's at the end of his career, or maybe he's just his personality, but it was refreshing. There was none of the blah, blah, blah stuff that's just the politically correct stuff, the stuff that's against the scriptures, things like that. Now, this guy, he wasn't speaking from the scriptures, but he was speaking scriptural principles. And so he talked about He's one of the leading experts in the country on what is called adverse childhood experiences. So adverse childhood experiences, they're called ACEs. It's the ACE study, adverse childhood experience. So when you're an adult, you take this test. It's a series of questions, asks you specific questions about when you were a child, if this happened to you, if your parent treated you this way, if you felt like there was a time where you might not have food, or you thought there was a time where your parent might leave, or things like that. And the number of times you answer yes, that's your ACE score. And what he shared is that this long-term, decades-long study of these adverse childhood experiences have shown that children who have many adverse childhood experiences, that they will develop health issues, that they'll develop relational issues, they'll develop money issues, they'll develop job issues. They turn out to be, quite frankly, many times a mess when they're adults because of these adverse childhood experiences. Now, we know that there is grace. As Christians, we know that God, Genesis 50:20, that he takes those things that were meant for evil and he turns them for our good. We know that suffering is even a good thing, that God uses suffering to form us. Nevertheless, though, it still stands to reason that these adverse childhood experiences, that because of these, that our country and our world even is a mess. I mean, look around at it. Look around at families and how broken they are. And look, those of you who are involved in child welfare systems, and you can see how broken these systems are, even the workers who are involved, who are servants and who want to help. I mean, you just feel helpless at times because of how broken everything is. And so it was interesting that at the end of this talk, he said this. He said, I've been racking my brain, really, just trying to think of what are the solutions to these issues. And he said, there's been a lot of solutions that have been thrown out there. The government throws money at it. We throw these systems at it. We do all of this stuff, and we have all of these caseworkers and lawyers for the kids and all of this stuff. We have all of this stuff that we've thrown at it. And he said, but as he studied the issues from a scientific perspective, he wasn't saying this was his opinion. He was saying from a quantitative perspective and a qualitative perspective, when he took it all together, he said the only thing he could come up with is that we need nationwide parenting classes. I mean, just imagine that. I mean, that's his take on it. He almost said it tongue in cheek because he knows it's not going to happen. He said, really what we need better parents. We need parents who are discipled to be parents. We need parents who are like this person who submitted the question and really want to learn, to change the tide of these adverse childhood experiences, because the studies show that if these adverse childhood experiences could just be limited a bit, it would literally change society for the better. I mean, it just shows the sicknesses, the broken relationships, the messed up systems that we have. The parenting in our country is so bad that it's ruining society. Why? Because parenting well is really, really hard. So you have to know that going into it. I mean, you think of all of the things that we need licenses for in order to do a job. I mean, a nurse has to go through, my daughter Molly went through so much study and tests and education and training to be a nurse, and she should. A pastor needs to go through seminary, needs to go through mentoring, needs to go through many, many years of training in order to be a pastor well. A musician is the same thing, a teacher. But then parents, they're just thrown into it without the training. And then we get a mess and we wonder why. And I think it's true that if you're not committed to parenting well, please don't bring a child into the world if you're not ready for it, if you're not going to do it well, if you're not going to get resourced. So couple that with this, and I think I said it earlier, but I'll say it again. Having a wayward child when they're older is one of the most stressful things a person can endure, is having a child who's just a mess as an adult. So the last thing you want is to raise a kid in that limited window of time where they walk away from everything that you value when they become an adult. To make matters worse, the person asking this question, and many of you listening, maybe you weren't raised in a great family. Maybe you don't have that model of a dad and a mom who raised you the right way. That's another strike against you, because it's so hard to break generational patterns. So my point in sharing all this is not to be bleak, but it's to say that you are asking a great question, an important question, a society-changing question on parenting. So I'm going to assume, though, that you're already committed to doing all of the things that you need to do that are like low-hanging fruit for a Christian parent to parent well. There was a plaque. What do I mean? I'll tell you. There was a plaque in our house growing up that said the best thing that a father can do for his children is to love their mother. The best thing a father can do for his children is to love their mother, to love his wife. So I want to just start saying that from the outset is, do you love your wife? Are you honoring her? Are you treating her as fine china? That's number one. Put your wife first above yourself. And you could spend a lifetime, and you will spend a lifetime figuring out what that looks like. Second, I'm going to assume that you have a really good handle on your mood. Now that might sound funny to say that, but I've had dads ask me for advice, and after I look in the mirror, because we're all guilty of it, I'll say to them or ask them, how's your mood? How's your mood at home? How's your mood after I can see how your mood is right now talking to me. Your mood's great. You're giving me your best. Do you give your wife your best? Do you give your kids your best? Do you give your home your best? When you come home after a hard day at work or whatever it might be, what's your mood like? How's your mood? Third, do you have your kids involved in the local church? Are your kids involved in the local church? I know that the local church has big problems right now in America, and we talk about some of these problems in other Ask Dr. Better's episodes. And so, I know that, but there's also some really great churches out there. Augustine, the great church father, he had the same complaints many, many centuries ago when he said this. He said, the church is a whore. Now, it's pretty blatant there. The church is a whore, but the church is my mother, and I still love her. So he's recognizing the church has major problems. It always will, always has, but he still loves the church. The church is still the bride of Jesus. Even though the church can act like a whore at times, the church is still the bride of Christ. So do you have your kids involved at the church, regardless of how you feel about the church? Our kids tell us even today that the church years of being involved in ministries were so formative and impacting for them. So many people have given up on the church. So many people take their kids off the travel ball. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with travel ball, but there's a price to be paid for that. You're doing something there, and you're not able to do something over here. There's only so much time in the week. I'm going to assume next that you are a grace and not a law person. What do I mean by that? That you love Jesus, that you love grace, that you know how far you have fallen as a sinner, that you're a humble person, that you are not a judgmental person, judging your kids, judging everyone else, removing the speck out of someone else's eye when you have a log in your eye. I mean, it could go on and on about the message of grace that Jesus preached. Are you a person of Jesus? Are you a grace person? Or are you all law? Law. Rules. And many times those are the very things that maybe you struggle with that you're imposing on other people. I mean, I could go on and on about that. So I'm assuming that you are a grace person, because I believe that these things that I am assuming, that you are putting your wife first, that you are a grace and not a law person, that you are involved in the local church, that you are controlling your mood, all of these things, all of these givens. Remember how hard I said it was. But all of these are the baseline. I mean, this is the baseline, I think, for being a good dad and parenting well. That if you don't have these things in order that it's going to be an uphill battle from there. That you love Jesus, that you are not a vague God person. You know what I mean by that? A person who prays to the man upstairs, faith, family, and football. There's nothing wrong with faith. There's nothing wrong with family. There's nothing wrong with football. But when that's all there is, and when your faith is kind of a very vague faith and a vague being, where you believe in God, you believe in Jesus and all that stuff, but you're really more of a vague God person. That'll hurt you in your parenting. That will hurt you in your parenting. It'll also hurt you in your walk with Jesus. It results in a humble person. It results in a person who is done with the legalism and the silly rules. So I'm going to assume that all of what I just said is either there as a baseline in your life or it's in process, because you need all of that as a parent if you are going to raise kids who love Jesus. Now let me just stop there, because this can all sound like a bunch of rules and legalism as well. All the things that I'm listing right now, I could be violating the very principles that I'm sharing. I remember when I was a first-time parent, our son, our firstborn son, he would not eat. He would just not eat. I thought, this kid is never going to eat anything. He would only want to eat junk, and even that he wouldn't eat. And so we were struggling with him to force him to just eat so he could survive. And so we should have known that it wasn't as big of a deal as we were making it out to be. But we were first-time parents, and we were scared, and we didn't know. And so we're trying to get him to eat. And I remember one night, I went over the line. I don't even remember what I did, but I might have yelled at him or something that just really, I knew I was wrong. And I remember my mom called me in that moment, not knowing what was going on. And I just broke it down in tears. You know, hearing your mom's voice, you just break down in tears sometimes. And that's what I did. And I just told her, I was like, I just ruined it. I felt like I'd ruined it forever. And, you know, like just my parenting. And I just been so harsh with him. And she said something to me I'll never forget, and I'll share it with you. She said, kids are so forgiving. So with everything I've said so far, that how important it is and how you got to be careful and you got to get all these things in line, you're also going to make a lot of mistakes. And kids are really forgiving, and they are resilient, and it's going to be okay. Even if you haven't done a lot of these things, it's time to do them. It's time to pick it up and do it. So I just want to stop there and say that. But I want to get to the silver bullet, because there's one thing that we did in addition to everything I just mentioned that I believe made all the difference in raising our kids. So when I was a kid, I was raised by the best parents, the original Dr. Betters, as I shared, and he's my dad, and you don't get better than that. And he was every bit as great of a dad as those of you who watch him can imagine him to be. And my mom was a great mom, and they're still great parents to this day. But I didn't talk to my parents the way that I could have and should have as a teenager. I was really kind of secretive. A few things happened when I was a kid. You know, I look back and I was probably oversensitive, but I remember one time I was sharing at my grandparents' house that a little girl had kissed me. I was in second grade, and that she had kissed me on the cheek, and I was so proud of it, and I told everybody. And I just remember a few people laughing. And that was enough to shut me down. That might sound oversensitive, and it is, but it's just the way kids work. I mean, you got to be really careful. And it shut me down for years on just talking and sharing things, being laughed at and things like that. And even to this day, I don't enjoy being laughed at. And it's something that I've had to work on as an adult. But yeah, so I held a lot in. I didn't talk to my parents openly as a teenager. And as a result, I had to figure a lot of things out for myself. I made mistakes. There was things that I kept inside that I didn't share. And I had these incredible parents with so much wisdom, and yet I didn't talk to them the way I could have. I mean, we did talk a lot. There was a lot of communication, but there still wasn't enough communication and from my end. And again, my parents were the most amazing parents. And so one of the things that my dad would preach, those of you who remember him preaching, and those of you who watch his sermons, he would say that he wants his kids and grandkids to do it better than he did it, to parent better. And so it's one of the things that I learned is that, they would have talked to me. They would have loved to talk to me, but I didn't always open up. And so what we did with our kids is we had what was called talk time. And here's the silver bullet that I promised. And the way that I thought it through was that if I talked to my kids every night, and I mean every night, from the time they can't even talk. I remember our firstborn son, Mark. I was talking to him before he could talk. Every night I would rock him in a rocking chair and I would talk to him. And then when he could start talking, I would ask him, how did your day go? Is there anything that scared you? Is there anything you're confused about? Is there any questions that you have? And most of the time it was just funny things, and there's just really great things that would be said. But other times there was great fears that were shared, and there was questions that were asked that as a parent I could speak into his life. And so my theory was that if I do that every day, without fail, as much as possible, every night, we called it talk time. Even his babysitters who would come over and babysit him and put him to bed, he would insist on having talk time with them. Some of them will tell you that even to this day. That my theory was that if I were to do that every night, that by the time he was a teenager, he wouldn't know any other way but to talk to his parents. And our daughters would be the same way. And it happened. It worked out. Our kids would talk to us. Sometimes they would tell us things we didn't really want to hear. They would say so much, and I'd think, man, I wish you just wouldn't share that. I wish I hadn't known that. But at the same time, I was glad to know it. So there was talk time. It proved right that when he was 3 and 4 and 6 and 9 and 10, that if I carried that into his teen years, that he would never remember a time he wasn't talking to us. And so that would be my biggest piece of advice. And scriptures talk about this in Deuteronomy. It talks about speaking to your children at all times, to always be speaking the words of the Lord into them. Proverbs is replete with verses about listening to your parents' wisdom and speaking to your children, speaking grace and truth into their lives. So to answer your question, on top of all of the basics and the baseline that I shared of what it takes to raise kids who love Jesus, I would add to that the silver bullet, at least in our experience, of talk time. I hope this helps, and may God bless you.
Hello, my name is Danielle Cantler, team member here at MARKINC Ministries. Thank you so much for your continued support of this video series. Ask Dr. Betters is not meant to be a substitute for professional counseling, but instead is designed to extract the biblical principles around the questions being asked. We encourage you to seek professional counseling if needed. Professional counselors are ready to assist you at Anchored Hope Biblical Counseling. See the links below for more information on Anchored Hope and all of the free resources we offer here at MARKINC Ministries. Thank you for watching, and welcome to the MARKINC family.